Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bibliobibli and Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Last time,
Harry and the gang go to Hogsmeade in hopes of meeting up with Ginny, but Harry never did because she was off with Dean Thomas.
her boyfriend.
Yes. Possibly at not Madame Rosemertha. I can't remember who runs that cafe.
Madame Puttyfoots.
Madame Puttyfoots.
Mm-hmm.
Rosemerta was the one that Ron was looking at in the pub there.
Yep. The Three Broomsticks.
Yep. And Hermione was getting a little jealous.
Yeah, she wasn't feeling that.
Mm-hmm. There's just so much attraction and tension going around. My goodness.
All over the place with all these
Harry and
kids.
Ron. Or not Harry and Ron. This isn't that type of fan fiction. Harry and Ginny and Hermione and Ron.
Yep.
And then on their way back, Katie Bell gets cursed by a necklace that someone imperioused her to acquire in the Three Broomsticks. And Harry is dead to rights sure that it is Malfoy.
Yep.
I think it's Snape. Harry thinks it's Malfoy, and McGonagall thinks that Harry's lying. Well, not that he's lying, but that he's wrong.
Yeah, that he's...
She understands his suspicions, but there's no evidence.
Because Malfoy was in detention with her the whole time.
Yes. Harry and Ron don't believe him, though.
Hermione and Ron.
Hermione and Ron. Why do I keep... It's early.
It is. Hermione and Ron are, embarrassed for Harry. Malfoy again.
Conspiracy again.
Yep. They're just like, ugh, no.
And that's where we left off.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Whatever that curse was, it doesn't sound like it's pleasant.
Yeah, no.
I mean, she was screaming and writhing around on the ground in agony. It sounds awful. Chapter 13. The Secret Riddle. Katie was removed to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries the following day, by which time the news that she'd been cursed had spread all over the school, though the details were confused and nobody other than Harry, Ron, Hermione and Leanne seemed to know that Katie herself had not been the intended target. "Oh, and Malfoy knows, of course," said Harry to Ron and Hermione, who continued their policy of feigning deafness whenever Harry mentioned his Malfoy is a Death Eater theory. Harry wondered whether Dumbledore would return from wherever he had been in time for Monday night's lesson, but having had no word on the contrary, he presented himself outside Dumbledore's office at 8 o'clock, knocked, and was told to enter. There sat Dumbledore, looking unusually tired. His hand was as black and burned as ever, but he smiled when he gestured to Harry to sit down. The Pensieve was sitting on the desk again, casting silvery specks of light over the ceiling. "You have had a busy time while I have been away," Dumbledore said. "I believe you witnessed Katie's accident." "Yes, sir. How is she?" "Still very unwell, though she was relatively lucky. She appears to have brushed the necklace with the smallest possible amount of skin. There was a tiny hole in her glove. Had she put it on, had she even held it in her ungloved hand, she would have died, perhaps instantly. Luckily, Professor Snape was able to do enough to prevent a rapid spread of the curse." "Why him?" said Harry quickly. "Why not Madame Pomfrey?" "Impertinent!" said a soft voice from one of the portraits on the wall, and Phineas Nigellus Black, Sirius's great-great-grandfather, raised his head from his arms where he had appeared to be sleeping. "I would not have permitted a student to question the way Hogwarts operated in my day." "Yes, thank you, Phineas," said Dumbledore quellingly. "Professor Snape knows much more about the dark arts than Madame Pomfrey, Harry. Anyway, the St. Mungo staff are sending me hourly reports, and I am hopeful that Katie will make a full recovery in time." "Where were you this weekend, sir?" Harry asked, disregarding a strong feeling that he might be pushing his luck, a feeling apparently shared by Phineas Nigellus, who hissed softly. "I'd rather not say just now," said Dumbledore. "However, I shall tell you in due course." "You will?" said Harry, startled. "Yes, I expect to," said Dumbledore, withdrawing a fresh bottle of silver memories from inside his robes and uncorking it with a prod of his wand. "Sir," said Harry tentatively, "I met Mundungus in Hogsmeade." "Ah, yes, I am already aware that Mundungus has been treating your inheritance with light-fingered contempt," said Dumbledore, frowning a little. "He's gone to ground since you accosted him outside the Three Broomsticks. I rather think he dreads facing me. However, rest assured that he will not be making away with any more of Sirius's old possessions." "That mangy old half-blood has been stealing Black family heirlooms?" said Phineas, incensed, and he walked out of his frame, undoubtedly to visit his portrait in number 12 Grimmauld Place. "Professor," said Harry after a short pause, "did Professor McGonagall tell you what I told her after Katy got hurt, about Draco Malfoy?" "She told me of your suspicions, yes," said Dumbledore. "And do you—" "I shall take all appropriate measures to investigate anyone who might have had a hand in Katy's accident," said Dumbledore. "But what concerns me now, Harry, is our lesson." Harry felt slightly resentful at this. If their lessons were so very important, why had there been such a large gap between the first and second? However, he said no more about Draco Malfoy, but watched as Dumbledore poured the fresh memories into the pensieve and began swirling the stone basin once more between his long-fingered hands. "You will remember, I am sure, that we left the tale of Lord Voldemort's beginnings at the point where the handsome muggle Tom Riddle had abandoned his witch wife Merope and returned to his family home in Little Angleton. Merope was left alone in London, expecting the baby who would one day become Lord Voldemort." "How do you know she was in London, sir?" "Because of the evidence of one Caractacus Burke," said Dumbledore, "who, by an odd coincidence, helped found the very shop whence came the necklace we have been discussing." He swirled the contents of the pensieve as Harry had seen him swirl them before, much as a gold prospector shifts for gold. Up out of the swirling silvery mass rose a little old man revolving slowly in the pensieve, silver as a ghost but much more solid, with a thatch of hair that completely covered his eyes. "Yes, we acquired it in curious circumstances. It was brought in by a young witch just before Christmas. Oh, many years ago now. She said she needed the gold badly. Well, that much was obvious. Covered in rags and pretty far along. Going to have a baby, see? She said the locket had been Slytherin's. Well, we hear that sort of story all the time. Oh, this was Merlin's, this was, his favourite teapot. But when I looked at it, it had his mark all right, and a few simple spells were enough to tell me the truth. Of course, that made it nearly priceless. She didn't seem to have any idea how much it were worth. Happy to get 10 galleons for it. Best bargain we ever made." Dumbledore gave the pensieve an extra vigorous shake, and Caractacus Burke descended back into the swirling mass of memory from whence he had come. "He only gave her 10 galleons," said Harry indignantly. "Caractacus Burke was not famed for his generosity," said Dumbledore. "So we know that, nearing the end of her pregnancy, Merope was alone in London and in desperate need of gold, desperate enough to sell her one and only valuable possession, the locket that was one of Morvolo's treasured family heirlooms." "But she could do magic," said Harry impatiently. "She could have got food and everything for herself by magic, couldn't she?" "Ah," said Dumbledore, "perhaps she could. But it is my belief, I'm guessing again, but I am sure I am right, that when her husband abandoned her, Merope stopped using magic. I do not think she wanted to be a witch any longer. Of course, it is also possible that her unrequited love and the attendant despair sapped her of her powers. That can happen. In any case, as you are about to see, Merope refused to raise her wand, even to save herself." "She wouldn't even stay alive for her son?" Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "Could you possibly be feeling sorry for Lord Voldemort?" "No," said Harry quickly. "But she had a choice, didn't she? Not like my mother." "Your mother had a choice too," said Dumbledore gently. "Yes, Merope Riddle chose death in spite of a son who needed her. But do not judge her too harshly, Harry. She was greatly weakened by long suffering, and she never had your mother's courage. And now, if you will stand—" "Where are we going?" asked Harry, as Dumbledore joined him at the front of the desk. "This time," said Dumbledore, "we are going to enter my memory. I think you will find it both rich in detail and satisfyingly accurate. After you, Harry." Harry bent over the pensieve. His face broke the cool surface of the memory, and then he was falling through the darkness again. Seconds later his feet hit firm ground. He opened his eyes and found that he and Dumbledore were standing in a bustling, old-fashioned London street. "There I am," said Dumbledore brightly, pointing ahead of them to a tall figure crossing the road in front of a horse-drawn milk cart. This younger Albus Dumbledore's long hair and beard were auburn. Having reached their side of the street, he strode off along the pavement, drawing many curious glances due to the flamboyantly cut suit of plum velvet that he was wearing. "Nice suit, sir," said Harry before he could stop himself, but Dumbledore merely chuckled as they followed his younger self a short distance, finally passing through a set of iron gates into a bare courtyard that fronted a rather grim, square building surrounded by high railings. He mounted the few steps leading to the front door and knocked once. After a moment or two, the door was opened by a scruffy girl wearing an apron. "Good afternoon. I have an appointment with a Mrs. Cole, who I believe is the matron here." "Oh!" said the bewildered-looking girl, taking in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. Just a Mrs. Cole!" she bellowed over her shoulder. Harry heard a distant voice shouting something in response. The girl turned back to Dumbledore. "Come in. She's on her way." Dumbledore stepped into a hallway tilted in black and white. The whole place was shabby but spotlessly clean. Harry and the older Dumbledore followed. Before the front door had closed behind them, a skinny, harassed-looking woman came scurrying toward them. She had a sharp-featured face that seemed more anxious than unkind, and she was talking over her shoulder to another aproned helper as she walked toward Dumbledore. "And take the iodine upstairs to Martha. Billy Stubbs has been picking his scabs, and Eric Wally's oozing all over his sheets. Chicken pox on top of everything else," she said to no one in particular. And then her eyes fell upon Dumbledore, and she stopped dead in her tracks, looking as astonished as if a giraffe had just crossed her threshold. "Good afternoon," said Dumbledore, holding out his hand. Mrs. Cole simply gaped. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I sent you a letter requesting an appointment, and you very kindly invited me here today." Mrs. Cole blinked. Apparently deciding that Dumbledore was not a hallucination, she said feebly, "Oh, yes. Well then, you'd better come into my room, yes." She led Dumbledore into a small room that seemed part sitting room, part office. It was as shabby as the hallway, and the furniture was old and mismatched. She invited Dumbledore to sit on a rickety chair and seated herself behind a cluttered desk, eyeing him nervously. "I'm here, as I told you in my letter, to discuss Tom Riddle and arrangements for his future," said Dumbledore. "Are you family?" said Mrs. Cole. "No, I'm a teacher," said Dumbledore. "I've come to offer Tom a place at my school." "What school's this, then?" "It's called Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. "And how come you're interested in Tom?" "We believe he has qualities we are looking for." "You mean he's won a scholarship? How can he have done? He's never been entered for one." "Well, his name has been down for our school since birth." "Who registered him? His parents?" There was no doubt that Mrs. Cole was inconveniently sharp. Apparently Dumbledore thought so too, for Harry now saw him slip his wand out of the pocket of his velvet suit, at the same time picking up a piece of perfectly blank paper from Mrs. Cole's desktop. "Here," said Dumbledore, waving his wand once as he passed her the piece of paper. "I think this will make everything clear." Mrs. Cole's eyes slid out of focus and back again as she gazed intently at the blank paper for a moment. "That seems perfectly in order," she said placidly, handing it back. Then her eyes fell upon a bottle of gin in 2 glasses that had certainly not been present a few moments before. May I offer you a glass of gin?" she said in an extra refined voice. "Thank you so very much," said Dumbledore, beaming. It soon became clear that Mrs. Cole was no novice when it came to gin drinking. Pouring both of them a generous measure, she drained her own glass in one gulp. Smacking her lips frankly, she smiled at Dumbledore for the first time, and he didn't hesitate to press his advantage. "I was wondering whether you could tell me anything of Tom Riddle's history. I think he was born here in the orphanage." "That's right," said Mrs. Cole, helping herself to more gin. "I remember it clear as anything, because I'd just started here myself. New Year's Eve and bitter cold, snowing, you know, nasty night, and this girl, not much older than I was myself at the time, came staggering up the front steps. Well, she wasn't the first. We took her in, and she had the baby within an hour, and she was dead in another hour." Mrs. Cole nodded impressively and took another generous gulp of gin. Did she say anything before she died? Asked Dumbledore. Anything about the boy's father, for instance? Now as it happened she did, said Mrs. Cole, who seemed to be rather enjoying herself now, with the gin in her hand and an eager audience for her story. I remember she said to me, I hope he looks like his papa. And I won't lie, she was right to hope it, because she were no beauty. And then she told me he was to be named Tom for his father, and Marvolo for her father. Yeah, I know, funny name, innit? We wondered whether she came from a circus, and she said the boy's surname were to be Riddle. And then she died after that without another word. Well, we named him just as she said. It seemed so important to the poor girl, but no Tom nor Marvolo or any kind of Riddle ever came looking for him. No family at all, so he stayed in the orphanage and he's been here ever since. Mrs. Cole helped herself, almost absent-mindedly, to another healthy measure of gin. 2 pink spots had appeared high on her cheekbones. Then she said, He's a funny boy. Yes, said Dumbledore. I thought he might be. He was a funny baby, too. Hardly ever cried, you know. And then, when he got a little older, he was odd. Odd in what way? Asked Dumbledore gently. Well, But Mrs. Cole pulled up short, and there was nothing blurry or vague about the inquisitorial glance she shot Dumbledore over her gin glass. He's definitely got a place at your school, you say? Definitely, said Dumbledore. And nothing I say can change that? Nothing, said Dumbledore. You be taking him away whatever? Whatever, repeated Dumbledore gravely. She squinted at him as though deciding whether or not to trust him. Apparently just she decided she could, because she said in a sudden rush, He scares the other children. You mean he's a bully? Asked Dumbledore. I think he must be, said Mrs. Cole, frowning slightly. But it's very hard to catch him at it. There have been incidents. Nasty things. Dumbledore did not press her, though Harry could tell he was interested. She took yet another gulp of gin, and her rosy cheeks grew rosier still. Billy Stubbs' rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it, and I don't see how he could have done, but even so, it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it? I shouldn't think so, no, said Dumbledore quietly. But I'm jiggered if I know how he got up there to do it. All I know is he and Billy argued the day before, and then... Mrs. Cole took another giant swig of gin, slopping a little over her chin this time. On the summer outing, we take them out, you know, once a year to the countryside or to the seaside. Well, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop were never quite the same after, and all we ever got out of them was that they'd gone into a cave with Tom Riddle. He swore they'd just gone exploring, but something happened in there, I'm sure of it. And, well, there have been a lot of other things. Funny things. She looked round at Dumbledore again, and though her cheeks were flushed, her gaze was steady. I don't think many people will be sorry to see the back of him. You understand, I'm sure, that we will not be keeping him permanently, said Dumbledore. He'll have to return here at the very least every summer. Oh, well, that's better than a whack on the nose with a rusty poker, said Mrs. Cole with a slight hiccup. She got to her feet, and Harry was impressed to see that she was quite steady, even though 2/3 of the gin were now gone. I suppose you'd like to see him? Very much, said Dumbledore, rising too. She led him out of her office and up the stone stairs, calling out instructions and admonitions to helpers and children as she passed. The orphans, Harry saw, were all wearing the same kind of greyish tunic. They looked reasonably well cared for, but there was no denying that this was a grim place in which to grow up. Here we are, said Mrs. Cole, as they turned off the second landing and stopped outside the front door in a long corridor. She knocked twice and entered. Tom, you've got a visitor. This is Mr. Dunderbore. He's come to see you. Well, I'll let him tell you. Harry and the 2 Dumbledores entered the room, and Mrs. Cole closed the door on them. It was a small bare room with nothing in it except an old wardrobe and an iron bedstead. A boy was sitting on top of the grey blankets, his legs stretched out in front of him, holding a book. There was no trace of the gaunts in Tom Riddle's face. Merope had got her dying wish. He was his handsome father in miniature, tall for 11 years old, dark hair and pale. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. There was a moment's silence. How do you do, Tom? Said Dumbledore, walking forward and holding out his hand. The boy hesitated, then took it, and they shook hands. Dumbledore drew up the hard wooden chair beside Riddle so that the pair of them looked rather like a hospital patient and visitor. I'm Professor Dumbledore. Professor? Repeated Riddle. He looked wary. Is that like doctor? What are you here for? Did she get you in to have a look at me?" He was pointing at the door through which Mrs. Cole had just left. "No, no," said Dumbledore, smiling. "I don't believe you," said Riddle. "She wants me looked at, doesn't she? Tell the truth." He spoke the last 3 words with a ringing force that was almost shocking. It was a command, and it sounded as though he'd given it many times before. His eyes widened, and he was glaring at Dumbledore, who made no response except to continue smiling pleasantly. After a few seconds, Riddle stopped glaring, though he looked, if anything, warier still. "Who are you?" "I've told you. My name is Professor Dumbledore, and I work at a school called Hogwarts. I've come to offer you a place at my school, your new school, if you would like to come." Riddle's reaction to this was most surprising. He leapt from the bed and backed away from Dumbledore, looking furious. "You can't kid me. The asylum, that's where you're from, isn't it? Professor, yes, of course. Well, I'm not going, see? That old cat's the one who should be in the asylum. I never did anything to little Amy Benson or Dennis Bishop, and you can ask 'em. They'll tell you." "I'm not from the asylum," said Dumbledore patiently. "I'm a teacher, and if you will sit down calmly, I shall tell you about Hogwarts. Of course, if you'd rather not come to the school, nobody will force you." "I'd like to see them try," sneered Riddle. "Hogwarts," Dumbledore went on, as though he'd not heard Riddle's last words, "is a school for people with special abilities." "I'm not mad." "I know you're not mad. Hogwarts is not a school for mad people. It's a school for magic." There was silence. Riddle had frozen, his face expressionless, but his eyes were flickering back and forth between each of Dumbledore's, as though trying to catch one of them lying. "Magic?" he repeated in a whisper. "That's right," said Dumbledore. It's magic, what I can do." "What is it that you can do?" "All sorts," breathed Riddle. A flush of excitement was rising up his neck into his hollow cheeks. He looked fevered. "I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to." His legs were trembling. He stumbled forward and sat down on the bed again, staring at his hands, his head bowed as though in prayer. "I knew I was different," he whispered to his own quivering fingers. "I knew I was special. Always I knew there was something." "Well, you are quite right," said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling, but watching Riddle intently. "You are a wizard." Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, his expression almost bestial. "Are you a wizard too?" "Yes, I am." "Prove it," said Riddle at once, in the same commanding tone he'd used when he said, "Tell the truth." Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "If, as I take it, you are accepting your place at Hogwarts—" "Of course I am." "Then you will address me as Professor or Sir." Riddle's expression hardened for the most fleeting moment before he said, in an unrecognisably polite voice, "I'm sorry, sir. I meant, please, Professor, could you show me?" Harry was sure that Dumbledore was going to refuse, that he would tell Riddle there would be plenty of time for practical demonstrations at Hogwarts, that they were currently in a building full of muggles and must therefore be cautious. To his great surprise, however, Dumbledore drew his wand from an inside pocket of his suit jacket, pointed it at the shabby wardrobe in the corner, and gave the wand a casual flick. The wardrobe burst into flames. Riddle jumped to his feet. Harry could hardly blame him for howling in shock and rage. All his worldly possessions must be in there. But even as Riddle rounded on Dumbledore, the flames vanished, leaving the wardrobe completely undamaged. Riddle stared from the wardrobe to Dumbledore, then, his expression greedy, he pointed at the wand. "Where can I get one of them?" "All in good time," said Dumbledore. "I think there is something trying to get out of your wardrobe." And sure enough, a faint rattling could be heard from inside it. For the first time, Riddle looked frightened. "Open the door," said Dumbledore. Riddle hesitated, then crossed the room and threw open the wardrobe door. On the topmost shelf, above a rail of threadbare clothes, a small cardboard box was shaking and rattling as there were several frantic mice trapped inside it. "Take it out," said Dumbledore. Riddle took down the quaking box. He looked unnerved. "Is there anything in that box you should not have?" said Dumbledore. Riddle threw Dumbledore a long, clear, calculating look. "Yes, I suppose so, sir," he said, finally, in an expressionless voice. "Open it," said Dumbledore. Riddle took off the lid and tipped the contents onto his bed without looking at them. Harry, who had expected something more exciting, saw a mess of small everyday objects, a yo-yo, a silver thimble, and a tarnished mouth-organ among them. Once free of the box, they stopped quivering and lay quite still upon the thin blankets. "You will return these to their owners with your apologies," said Dumbledore, calmly, putting his wand back into his jacket. "I shall know whether or not it has been done. And be warned, thieving is not tolerated at Hogwarts." Riddle did not look remotely abashed. He was still staring coldly and appraisingly at Dumbledore. At last he said in a colourless voice, "Yes, sir." "At Hogwarts," Dumbledore went on, "we will not only teach you how to use magic, but to control it. You have, inadvertently, I am sure, been using your powers in a way that is neither taught nor tolerated at our school. You are not the first, nor will you be the last to allow your magic to run away with you. But you should know that Hogwarts can expel students, and the Ministry of Magic, yes, there is a ministry, will punish lawbreakers still more severely. All new wizards must accept that, in entering our world, they abide by our laws." "Yes, sir," said Riddle again. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. His face remained quite blank as he put the little cachet of stolen objects back into the cardboard box. When he had finished, he turned to Dumbledore and said boldly, "I haven't got any money." "That is easily remedied," said Dumbledore, drawing a leather money pouch from his pocket. "There is a fund at Hogwarts for those who require assistance to buy books and robes. You might have to buy some of your spell books and so on second hand, but—" "Where do you buy spell books?" interrupted Riddle, who'd taken the heavy money bag without thanking Dumbledore and was now examining a fat gold galleon. "In Diagon Alley," said Dumbledore. "I have your list of books and school equipment with me. I can help you find everything." "You're coming with me?" said Riddle, looking up. "Certainly, if you—" "I don't need you," said Riddle. "I'm used to doing things for myself. I go round London on my own all the time. How do you get to this Diagon Alley, sir?" he added, catching Dumbledore's eye. Harry thought that Dumbledore would insist upon accompanying Riddle, but once again he was surprised. Dumbledore handed Riddle the envelope containing his list of equipment, and after telling Riddle exactly how to get to the leaky cauldron from the orphanage, he said, "You'll be able to see it, although muggles around you, Northern magic people, that is, will not. Ask for Tom the barman. Easy enough to remember, as he shares your name." Riddle gave an irritable twitch as though trying to displace an irksome fly. "You dislike the name Tom?" "There are a lot of Toms," muttered Riddle. Then, as though he could not suppress the question, as though it burst from him in spite of himself, he asked, "Was my father a wizard? He was called Tom Riddle too. They've told me." "I'm afraid I don't know," said Dumbledore, his voice gentle. "My mother can't have been magic, or she wouldn't have died," said Riddle more to himself than Dumbledore. "It must have been him. So, when I've got all my stuff, when do I come to this Hogwarts?" "All the details are on the second piece of parchment in your envelope," said Dumbledore. "You will leave King's Cross Station on the 1st of September. There's a train ticket in there, too." Riddle nodded. Dumbledore got to his feet and held out his hand again. Taking it, Riddle said, "I can speak to snakes. I found out when we've been to the country on trips. They find me. They whisper to me. Is that normal for a wizard?" Harry could tell that he'd withheld mention of this strangest power until that moment, determined to impress. "It is unusual," said Dumbledore after a moment's hesitation, "but not unheard of." His tone was casual, but his eyes moved curiously over Riddle's face. They stood for a moment, man and boy, staring at each other. Then the handshake was broken. Dumbledore was at the door. "Goodbye, Tom. I shall see you at Hogwarts." "I think that'll do," said the white-haired Dumbledore at Harry's side, and seconds later they were soaring weightlessly through darkness once more before landing squarely in the present-day office. "Sit down," said Dumbledore, landing beside Harry. Harry obeyed, his mind still full of what he'd just seen. "He believed it much quicker than I did. I mean, when you told him he was a wizard," said Harry. "I didn't believe Hagrid at first when he told me." "Yes, Riddle was perfectly ready to believe that he was, to use his word, special," said Dumbledore. "Did you know, then?" asked Harry. "Did I know that I'd just met the most dangerous dark wizard of all time?" said Dumbledore. "No, I had no idea what he would grow up to be, that he would grow up to be what he is. However, I was certainly intrigued by him. I returned to Hogwarts intending to keep an eye on him, something I should have done in any case, given that he was alone and friendless, but which already I felt I ought to do for others' sake as much as his. His powers, as you heard, were surprisingly well developed for such a young wizard, and, most interestingly and ominously of all, he had already discovered that he had some measure of control over them, and begun to use them consciously, and, as you saw, they were not the random experiments typical of young wizards. He was already using magic against other people, to frighten, to punish, to control. The little stories of the strangled rabbit and the young boy and girl he lured into a cave were most suggestive. I can make them hurt if I want to.
And he was a Parselmouth, interjected Harry.
Yes, indeed, a rare ability, and one supposedly connected with the dark arts, although, as we know, there are Parselmouths among the great and the good too. In fact, his ability to speak to serpents did not make me nearly as uneasy as his obvious instincts for cruelty, secrecy, and domination.
"Time is making fool of us again," said Dumbledore, indicating the dark sky beyond the windows.
"But before we part, I want to draw your attention to certain features of this scene we've just witnessed, for they have a great bearing on the matters we shall be discussing in future meetings. Firstly, I hope you noticed Riddle's reaction when I mentioned that another shared his first name, Tom."
Harry nodded.
"There he showed his contempt for anything that tied him to other people, anything that made him ordinary. Even then he wished to be different, separate, notorious. He shed his name, as you know, within a few short years of that conversation, and created the mask of Lord Voldemort, behind which he's been hidden for so long. I trust you also noticed that Tom Riddle was already highly self-sufficient, secretive, and apparently friendless. He did not want help or companionship on his trip to Diagon Alley. He preferred to operate alone. The adult Voldemort is the same. You will hear many of his Death Eaters claiming that they are in his confidence, that they alone are close to him, even understand him. They are deluded. Lord Voldemort has never had a friend, nor do I believe that he has ever wanted one. And lastly, I hope you are not too sleepy to pay attention to this, Harry. The young Tom Riddle liked to collect trophies. You saw the box of stolen articles he'd hidden in his room. These were taken from victims of his bullying behaviour, souvenirs, if you will, of particularly unpleasant bits of magic. Bear in mind this magpie-like tendency for this, particularly, will be important later. And now it really is time for bed."
Harry got to his feet. As he walked across the room, his eyes fell upon the little table upon which Marvolo Gaunt's ring had rested last time, but the ring was no longer there.
"Yes, Harry?"
said Dumbledore, for Harry had come to a halt. "The ring's gone," said Harry, looking round. "But I thought you might have the mouth organ or something." Dumbledore beamed at him, peering over the top of his half-moon spectacles.
"Very astute, Harry. But the mouth organ was only ever just a mouth organ."
And on that enigmatic note he waved to Harry, who understood himself to be dismissed.
So there were some red flags there.
There are a lot of red flags there.
Some sociopathic, psychopathic tendencies showing up in that child.
Super psychopathic tendencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, I mean, doesn't surprise me, but...
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be one of those things where Tom, like, learned more about his past, and he slowly became, like, this evil dude. And that's how Voldemort became who he is. But no, he was just born that way.
Which I think is absolutely awesome.
Why?
It's... every time the bad guy has always, like, been wronged in some way or had some traumatic event happen and he hates the world and this and that. There's, you know what I mean? Like, there's always these events that, like, lead them down the path of evil, whereas in this particular situation, it's, he was born a psychopath and therefore has a biological predilection towards not having a problem with hurting and abusing people. He just doesn't feel anything.
I feel like it's a little bit of both, though. Because, I mean, he did have that traumatic past, too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, growing up in an orphanage can't be pleasant. And his
So
experiences...
it's not fully he was just born that way, but...
Well, no, it's not. It's not. And I'm not saying it is. I just love that that's an element of his character. It's not just the traumatic events. There's also this other piece of it that he's a psychopath.
He's just mentally ill.
He's a psychopath. I wouldn't call it mentally ill, because you can be...
He is mentally ill.
But you can... No, but I'm saying you can be a psychopath, or have psychopathic tendencies, but it doesn't make you mentally ill. You can be a fully functioning human being that doesn't hurt people and be a psychopath.
But he also shows sociopathic tendencies, which is a mental illness.
Excuse me.
He's a little mentally ill.
I'm not saying that isn't a component, but I see. I don't look at the sociopathy. I think it definitely leans closer to psychopathy.
Let's just put it down as we are not therapists, we are not mental doctors,
Health experts.
so
But
he's messed up.
the point is
He has some mental
he
problems.
Right. The point is he displays some very deviant behaviors, like the trophy collecting and the whatever he did to those two kids in the cave. I don't know, but that's creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to those two kids, I don't know.
I mean, if he wasn't a wizard, he definitely would have been a serial killer.
Right. I just love that element of how she introduces this piece of his character that no, he really is like some issues. It's like there's issues here. It's not just that, he grew up in an orphanage and he hates his dad and he hates his mom and stuff happened to him. It's like, no, he grew up in an orphanage and he had these bad experiences in combination with bad wiring in his brain.
Mm-hmm.
And also that narcissism too, that psychopathic, arrogance, and it's great that, JK shows the difference with Harry, because Harry's like, I didn't believe it at first. I didn't believe I was a wizard. I was like, what? And meanwhile, Tom Riddle is like, I knew it. He does that, I knew I was special kind of thing, you see in the movies all the time. I knew it, He's dead to rights, yeah, I am the best. I am the greatest. I am special. I am unique. That's a psychopathic thing too. That's a narcissism thing going on there, and the comparison too between Harry's mother and Tom's mother.
Oh, yeah. Very different.
Very different, yeah.
Kind of opposite sides of the spectrum there.
Right. Same, but different. But same.
But still same. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel like there was much in this chapter other than Voldemort was a psychopath since birth.
Yeah.
And they probably should have done a little bit more with his mental health in the beginning.
This was the 1920s, I think, at the time.
Yeah, so, yeah, he just would have kind of gotten locked up in an asylum, and then that's about it.
He was
Straitjacket, and
he was scared of it. He thought Dumbledore was there to take him away.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew, not normal. They're coming to take me away, ho ho. They're coming to take me away. He was convinced he was going to the asylum. Knew what he was doing was wrong. Didn't care. Feels nothing for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this chapter is just to demonstrate, like...
So he's not insane.
I think that's part of what the chapter is Voldemort is not crazy, right? Like, he's not insane in the sense that Bellatrix is insane. I think Bellatrix is crazy.
No, because she knows what she's doing. She knows that she's causing pain, and
yeah,
she just enjoys it.
She's sadistic. Yeah, she's not crazy. She's sadistic.
Yeah.
He just she just sets him up to be just like the exact opposite of Harry in every way.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't want anyone, doesn't need anyone, doesn't care, none of it. It's all about him and what he wants and what he can get. And Harry is like, I just want friends and family, people to love me.
Maybe for this guy to stop trying to kill me, be nice.
I don't know. I think it just lays the groundwork for a really great villain. And that she introduces that element to the bad guy for a children's series.
I mean, we kind of knew from the beginning, though.
That he was a psychopath?
Yeah.
But she really lays it right out there. Very, like, she did her research with that. You know what I mean? How she writes him. I think it's solid.
Mm-hmm.
Because you read it and you go, okay, I think I've seen this in a Ted Bundy documentary or something. You know what I mean? Or any other serial murderer you could think of.
Yeah, they're pretty much all the same in that regard.
Yeah, they display a lot of the same characteristics.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You're not special.
I mean, Voldemort is a mass murderer, so...
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
He's more of a cult leader, like,
Jim Jones.
I was gonna say the Manson.
Oh, Charlie Manson.
Yeah, there you go. Manson family.
The Death Eaters.
Mm-hmm.
They're his family.
Yep.
Voldemort doesn't want a family.
I mean, think of the Manson family. They would show up at your door and kill your whole family.
I know.
What did Voldemort do to Harry's family? Exact same thing.
Yeah, showed up and killed them all.
And this would have been after the fact, so Voldemort is a poser. Get your own thing, Voldemort.
Oh, like he's copycatting.
Yeah, every serial killer has to have a calling card. He's a copycat.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
No, you just don't know yet. That's why I'm saying no, he's not. Voldemort has his own thing, trust me. You'll see.
I mean, Dark Mark, yeah.
No.
Was he turning people inside out?
Oh, God!
I remember hearing about
from
that
the
spell,
book.
yeah.
The spell, yep. From whatever Hermione was reading.
Mm-hmm.
In the, yeah. I wonder if he has ever done that before. Probably.
Probably. Just to try it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's the kind of guy who's like, I just want to see what happens if I do this. He's probably done it to somebody. No, Voldemort definitely has his own other thing.
I'm thinking about how that spell would work, and there's so many possibilities, and they're all just kind of creeping me out.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
And awful. I'm picturing it in my head. I don't know.
Like, does it just kind of invert your skin? Or does it...
Do you, like... I don't know.
Does it, like, you know, split you open, like, fold you around?
Yeah,
or...
yeah. Like, some Full Metal
Or-
Alchemist type thing going on.
Or does everything just kind of come out and wrap around you? Or, you know, other end?
Or both ends at the same time, like...
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that'd be hard with both ends. Because really, you only have like one hole, just 2 openings.
I don't know. I don't know how that spell works. Or does it just rearrange everything on a molecular level?
That's what I mean. There's many possibilities that could go.
All of which sound terrible. All of which sound awful. I don't know. If we ever see Voldemort, I guess we can ask him, because I'm sure he's tried it.
Oh, probably. So, the next chapter.
Yeah, so that being said, the next chapter is called Felix Felicis.
Felix Felicis?
Yes.
Sounds super familiar.
Yeah, it should.
Can't remember what, though.
Oh, jeez. Wow. Should I remind you?
Yeah, why not? Because I'm just thinking of Felix the cat right now.
Jesus Christ, it happened in this book. It's the bottle of liquid luck that Harry wins.
Oh,
the
that's
first
right.
potions
Little
class.
Felix.
Yeah, Little Felix.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's the name of the next chapter.
Oh.
Felix Felicis.
So not Dumbledore. Harry is going to have one lucky day.
Maybe.
Maybe he's going to use it to win over Ginny.
Maybe. We'll see, won't we?
I suppose so.
So, everyone, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And join us next time for Chapter 14, Felix Felicis.